And we're on. That's great. So I think we've heard a fair bit so far this week about coral loss and impacts to reefs, but I'm hoping that you feel a little bit inspired from watching this film that there are reefs that do have the capacity to come back. But that's not the end of this story. We've been hearing about this super El Nino that's on the horizon. And so for the next 35 to 45 minutes or so, we're going to have a conversation with my esteemed colleagues here about how to think about planning for the future for reefs, how do we identify reefs that are resilient, and what can we do to better manage them. So before we jump into the conversation, I'd like to introduce my colleagues here this evening. To my right, we have Joeli Vatiaki. Joeli is a strategic advisor for Blue Prosperity Fiji, the Fiji government-led partnership with the Waite Institute that is working on the articulation of the Fiji National Ocean Policy. He was a former head of the University of the South Pacific School for Marine Studies and acting director of the USP Samoa campus, a co-chair of the Korea South Pacific Fisheries Forum, and was a member of the panel of experts for a sustainable ocean economy. In addition, Joeli founded the Lumaningao Network to promote sustainable rural development and climate change adaptation in his home island of Nao. Sitting in the middle here is Jen Cassell. Dr. Jen Cassell is a research professor at the Marine Science Institute at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Jen's research is broadly focused on the ecology of coastal marine organisms, their role in nearshore ecosystems, and the response of these ecosystems to environmental change and human impacts. And she works and splits her time between coral reef ecosystems and kelp forest ecosystems. Jen has been on 15 different expeditions with Pristine Seas, so she'll have a little bit to tell us about what it's like going out on the boat as well. And she, more recently, was the 2025 winner of the Bleecker Award for Distinguished Contributors to the Indo-Pacific Ichthyology, and was also, which I think is very cool, was recently inducted into the Women Divers Hall of Fame. Sitting on the end of our circle here is Dr. Kyle Zawada, who is a research fellow at Macquarie University. He received his PhD from the University of St. Andrews, where he investigated the links between coral morphology, responses to disturbance, and habitat provision. His research focuses on leveraging emerging technologies and advanced analytical methods to address complex challenges in conservation and ecology. His work has included developing technology to disrupt the illegal trade in endemic Australian wildlife, collaborating with local communities in Kenya to support locally managed marine areas, and more recently, which we'll talk about, developing global models of coral reef health to identify a portfolio of climate-resilient reefs around the world. Sitting next to Joeli here is Dr. Rita Bento, who's a marine biologist and associate research scientist at New York University, Abu Dhabi, with nearly 2 decades of experience in studying and monitoring coral reefs. Her research focuses on how coral reef communities respond to recurrent disturbances and environmental change, particularly in the extreme environments of the Arabian region. She leads the UAE National Coral Reef Monitoring Program and coordinates the Regional Coral Reef Monitoring Program for the Rope-Me Sea area, which we'll hear more about. And then last but certainly not least is Yimnang Golbu. Yim is the Conservation Director for the Nature Conservancy's Micronesia and Polynesia programs. Prior to joining TNC, he served as Chief Executive Officer for the Palau International Coral Reef Center for 11 years. A native of Palau, Yim is based there and brings decades of experience in marine conservation, science, and natural resource management. In 2012, he received a commendation by the Palau National Congress for his contributions to the sustainability of Palau's natural resources. And in 2013, he was awarded a prestigious Pew Marine Conservation Fellowship. And my name is Stacy Jupiter. I'm the Executive Director of the Wildlife Conservation Society's Global Marine Program, and I'll be your moderator for the rest of the evening. So to start our conversation, Joeli, I'd like to ask you the first question. You had the opportunity to join the Fiji leg of the Pristine Seas expedition around the Pacific. Can you talk to a little bit about what that was like, and what did you learn more about Fiji's reefs from being part of this expedition?
Thank you very much, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Um, yes, I was really fortunate to join the expedition, um, and we saw the the activities taken at the reef, but there's a lot of preparatory work that goes before the, the journey to the beautiful places that we've seen. In Fiji, the planning activities were taking place months before the team arrived in Fiji, and in those months there were consultations with our leaders, because I think they mentioned that they like working with countries and with leaders. I guess that's the way to try and make sure that the whole nation where they are working is at least aware of what they're doing. So we were involved, I was directly involved in getting them to visit the communities, all of the communities where they were going to work in the reefs off. We had to go and observe the traditional protocols to make sure that the customary owners of the reefs were with the, the aims behind the expedition. And I really like the way that in some of those consultations, they were actually trying to get some information about the customary practices. And I mentioned that because the film we've just seen illustrates how they had to go from the US to go to remote parts of the Pacific. But it's customary in the Pacific that people actually declare no take when they need to prepare for something big. So that gives me kind of goosebump, because our people knew that management is critical for the sustenance of what is in the reefs.
And long before it was fashionable, for decades, you've been talking about the importance of integrating traditional ecological knowledge with other types of knowledge through Western science to inform effective management. Where do you see the opportunity through these expeditions in terms of bringing in the traditional knowledge? You talked about one example in terms of the traditional closures of the Tambu area. What are some of the other opportunities for highlighting and integrating the customary and the traditional knowledge?
One of the other things that I really liked when it was happening in front of me was that on every leg of the trip, as we were going through Fiji, different members of the communities, a lot of us work in institutions, and some actually work with communities. We spend time on board with the real experts, uh, dealing with the props, and I actually was fortunate to go down in submersible to 250 meters. And what I saw down there sort of frightened me. There were only three of us, the pilot behind us, but he warned us as we were descending, please help me look out for two things. I was wondering, what is this? Then he said, old fishing lines and old fishing nets. And I'm reminded of the kind of threats that we humans already pose. Because he was worried about those things tangling up with our propulsion system and maybe inhibiting our return back to the surface. We did not see any of those things. But he also told us as we were descending, getting close to the bottom of the sea, that we are actually about 10 feet away from whatever we are seeing in front of us. As we got down to the bottom, it was bare, like old Roman roads, surface of old Roman roads. And then as we moved towards the direction where the reef was, when we were up there, then we were faced with this wall, just like those walls. And there were times when we were closer to the wall and the surface, less than the 10 feet that he said. And our vision was blurred with all the sediments rising. And I'm saying to myself, we are not even 10 feet to the surface and are getting this misty, cloudy, cover-like color of the water. And I said, some of our countries are already thinking about putting heavy machinery into this environment to extract minerals. I'm really worried.
Thank you for that. Jen, I'm going to ask you the next question. I know that you've been the science lead for a fair few number of pristine seas expeditions, and I know that you recently came back from a leg in the Marshall Islands. You've been on thousands of dives around the world, giving the alarming changes that we've been hearing about this week and seeing ourselves in the water from climate change that we've experienced over the past few decades. Are you surprised when you jump in the water in a place like the Marshalls and you see it still thriving?
Yeah, I have been lucky enough to go to a lot of amazing places with pristine seas and with other expeditions. And no, I have to say, Stacy, that I'm not surprised when I fall off the boat in a remote area and see a healthy reef, a vibrant, pristine, if you will, air quotes, reef. I'm more surprised when I go to places and I see degraded, unhealthy reefs. And I think the reason for that, partially maybe it is because I'm really fortunate to get to go to see a lot of healthy reefs, but I work in a lot of other places as well with big populations and communities where the reefs are, quite a bit more degraded. And I think the reason that I'm more surprised when I see those is because I do feel like we have answers in hand to reverse some of that degradation or to at least prevent, it from going any further. And I'm surprised we're not employing them. Those answers, they're not the same everywhere we go, but there are answers all the way from the way that local people, especially on Pacific Islands, have been preserving, conserving, using their reefs for millennia in ways that haven't made them degraded. And some answers go all the way to the latest technology and things we're doing now. So we've got a great toolkit. So no, I'm more surprised when I see a degraded reef than I am when I fall off the boat and see a healthy one.
And so you're a fish person. How would you characterize a resilient reef from the fish communities that you see out on the reef?
Well, from a fish perspective, I'm always get labeled as a fish person. I do love fish, it's true, but I'm really a community ecologist. But from the fish perspective, it's pretty obvious. That's the first thing you see. So you roll off the boat, and before you're getting yourself all situated, and then you're going to go down to the benthos, to the coral. Before you ever get down and see the corals on the benthos, you know already, if you're a fish person, whether that place is unimpacted or not, because you see the big fish and you see the sharks before you get to the bottom. They're already coming under the boat, and it's the first thing you see. So maybe the fish people have an advantage of detecting a healthier reef before the coral people. They have to get all the way to the bottom, but it's pretty obvious. Sharks, for one. Big trevallies and other, tunas and other fish that are just fished out in most of the places of the world. When you see those, you know it's going to be a good place.
And what are the ways, in addition to the films that Pristine Seas is producing, that you're taking this information to governments to help persuade them to undertake some sort of management of these places?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Pristine Seas is, we go to places at the invitation of governments or of communities. We have some background information thinking about places that would be good for an expedition, but we don't go into a country until we're invited to come there. I feel like there's kind of three things I think about that I feel like are real problems to ocean conservation in general, not just coral reefs. And I list those as, one is so much of our ocean is still unexplored. Secondly, is that so much of our ocean is out of sight or out of mind, or out of sight and becoming out of mind. The deep waters, I mean, you know, we're all coral reef people here at this conference, but you know, all of the people out there in the world, most of them don't leave the coastline, or they're maybe see the ocean once in a while. So unexplored, out of sight, out of mind. And the third thing is this idea of shifting baselines, right? So much of the science we hear about, so much of the science we do, the paradigms we're coming up with now, we're doing our research on already degraded reefs, not on healthy, pristine reefs. So Pristine Seas has a model, I think, where we really do a good job at overcoming those hurdles. The first is unexplored, we explore. We go places really that are hard to get to, and we document what's there. Out of sight, out of mind, we solve that with filmmaking. We make a film in every trip we go, and we present that film first and foremost back to the communities or the government of the country, but also try to get those films out to the public, right? And what was the third thing? Oh, shifting baselines, right. So Pristine Seas does try to go to places that are remote, hard to get to, essentially kind of doing a space for time substitution. So I think maybe Enrique said it on one of the films. It's like some of the places we go, it's like you're in a time capsule. You're looking at what reefs might have looked like 300, 400, I don't know, 1,000 years ago. So that's the model. Exploration, bringing tools to bear, collecting data, making a film, and working with communities and governments to get both the film and the data back to them.
Thanks so much for sharing that. Kyle, I'm going to turn to you now. You have recently led a global analysis to identify a portfolio of coral reefs around the world that are potentially more likely to persist through climate impacts into the future. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found and explain what gives you the confidence to say that these particular coral reefs within this portfolio have climate resilient properties?
Absolutely, thank you, Stacey. Yeah, as we've just seen with the documentary that we've just seen, right? There are resilient reefs out there. There are reefs which are doing better, and the way that we typically measure this is to get into the water and sort of, if for a patch of reef, is it 100% coral cover? Is it 50%? Is it 10%? Is it 0? And we saw some of that going through time at the same sites that the guys have just presented in the documentary. But of course, what we can't do is be everywhere all at once, and we can't go back in time. But thankfully, what people have done is recorded coral cover for decades, from the 1960s all the way up to today. And many of you in the audience may have actually also taken part in these sort of coral benthic surveys that we do. And so what our team has been trying to do is take all of this historical 45,000 observations of coral reef health from 1960 up to today, and then if we know the time and place that a coral reef was measured, what we can then do is look at the history of that reef leading up to it. So in the 3 years before people were there, was there a heat wave? Was there a cyclone? What's the ocean chemistry like there? All of these different variables that could potentially explain why a coral reef is in a state at a given place and time. So then our job has been to sort of take all of these global data sets, satellite-derived sea surface temperature, as much information as we can, driving that from the research that people have done to understand the drivers of coral cover, and then basically unleash them into these machine learning models, where we train hundreds of models that learn the complex little relationships between coral reef health and the surrounding environment. Once we train these models and we're happy with them, what we can then do is unleash these models for all coral reef extent across the planet. And so we have broken up the world's coral reefs into 8.8 million pixels. I think each pixel is about 250 meters squared. I'm not sure if that's slightly bigger than the auditorium we're in, but imagine it is roughly this size. What our models do is go for each pixel, what was the coral reef health in the past, present, and the future? And you can imagine that once you solve that problem, once you're able to sort of generate these maps, it's almost like doing a massive survey all at once. Rather than having to get in the water, you can use these models to assess reef health everywhere. What that allows us to do, and we know, and as we've seen, is that not all reefs are dying all at once. There are pockets of resilience where corals maybe avoid climate change and the worst of the disturbances we're seeing, that they can recover and actually bounce back, and that they can actually resist some of these disturbances like marine heat waves. And so once you have these maps and these high-resolution maps of coral reef health, what you can then do is ask the question of, okay, which pockets of resilience are there in each part of the in each reef region across the planet? And so when we're talking about coral reef resilience, what we're saying is we're trying to find, and we set a target for each of the world's coral reefs for 30%, and I'm not sure if many of you have heard of, or many of you will have already heard of the 30 by 30 pledge to protect 30% of wilderness areas by 2030. We use that as a sort of guiding principle to find 30% of the world's coral reefs where they had high coral reef health today and into the future using climate change projection scenarios. And then we wanted to find reefs that were well connected, not these tiny isolated reefs, but reefs that were part of the bigger framework. And we also wanted to capture a diversity of reefs. You may have seen in the documentary, corals take on a lot of different shapes. They're not just one species, they are hundreds of species. And so what we've also done is mapped not just total coral cover health, but the coral cover of different species groups as well. And so you can find like a diversity of these different coral reefs, these different types of resilience, and then by sort of selecting those top 30% which are most likely to survive or have the best chance to survive in that region, what that allows us to do is then use that as a blueprint for climate smart investment. And by that I mean we can't protect everywhere, but what we can do is actually sort of say, look, if these are your reefs, these are the places to get into the water, potentially protect, and bring within that protective framework that we're all working towards.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Rita, I'm going to now give the floor to you. You have been compiling a database of coral reef monitoring from across the Arabian Sea and the Persian Gulf. These are reefs that experience some extreme heat, right? What impacts have you been seeing in the region, and where are there signs of resilience?
So it's quite interesting. Hi, everyone. Everybody's talking about the dive into the past and these amazing pristine reefs. And while I was watching it, I was thinking, for us, it's more a dive into the future. And we call the Arabian Persian Gulf as a natural laboratory because we have reefs at the moment. We know that they are the most heat-tolerant corals. And it's an environment that is extreme. We have sea surface temperatures that go above 35 degrees in the summer, and in some areas go all the way down to 14 in the winter. We have salinity above 42. So these reefs, they are tough and resilient. But none of this comes without a cost. We have seen declines in our coral cover in the last decades, and change in community as well. All of our branching coral, the fast-growing Acropora, it's functionally extinct in some of the areas. So we have reefs that are amazing, they are resilient. Studies indicating and surprising us every time that we are doing more studies. We have studies now on heat tolerance, and we have reefs that are okay until 39 degrees, and only after 39 degrees they are showing some signs of stress. So that resilience it's amazing. And we dive, we have marine heat waves, and we go into the sea, and there they are again. But we are losing them, and increasing every time because we're having marine heat waves every year. And they are increasing not only in severity, but also in the time, in the days they last every year. So reefs, they don't have time to recover. There's actually a talk tomorrow. One of our colleagues, Dr. Georgines Cavalcante, is going to talk about that, how since 2010 we've been having marine heat waves, and it doesn't allow our reefs to recover. I know that everybody talks about resilience, and it's quite important, but we can't forget that reefs are resilient, but they are not immune to climate change, correct? And so we do have to have our part in it and reduce greenhouse gases emissions, climate change mitigation as well, because the dive in the future, it's not as we've seen in this amazing documentary now.
Thank you so much for that insight. Yim, I'm going to give the floor to you right now. Through your experience as the CEO for PICRIC, and then now more recently as Conservation Director for TNC for Micronesia and Polynesia, can you tell us how you make use of coral reef monitoring data to inform government decision-making for reef management?
Yeah, thanks, Stacy, and hello, everyone. I think to use the information in the data, you have to really be clear on the message. Um, and I know that we do a lot of work and we like to show so many graphs, but for most of the times those are not necessary, and you need to really clarify the message and provide that message. And sometimes it's just a simple, but it has to be really clear. I think, yeah, if we try to show that we did so many work and this is so great and I published this in so many papers, it might sound, give you a lot of credibility, but for managers and for decision makers, it really doesn't mean anything. And so sometimes if you're not clear on that message, you'll have a good conversation, but after nothing happens. So I think that's the first thing, that message and how you deliver that message. But also the a very important part is, for many of this community, you have to have credibility in that community. And if we go to Fiji, you know, no matter how great you are and how many research you've done and how many publications, they're not going to listen to you like they listen to Joeli. Because he's earned it. The community trusts him. He's shown that the work that he's done and that community believes in him. So I think it's also who the messenger is, that you have to have earned that right and that credibility in that place to give that message. That doesn't mean others cannot give that message, but also if somebody comes to that place, they need to be introduced. There's an example of somebody who came down and said, everything is going to go bad. You need to do this and you need to do this. And after saying that for a while, they kind of gave up and they realized that they're not going anywhere. And until they started working with partners, with organizations that have credibility in that place, then they were able to move things. So I think, we're passionate and we're excited about the work but it's really, you have to work within the community or a place in that area with the right people and deliver that very good message in order to have those results being used to do good work.
Thanks for that. That's some really sound advice. Now I'm going to throw out a question for whoever would like to take it first. We've come through the 4th global bleaching event, and then after that, a global tipping points report came out the beginning of this year that said coral reefs are the first ecosystem on Earth to have passed the tipping point beyond which they can't recover. How do you respond when people ask if we should just give up on reefs completely? Who wants to take that one?
I will. I say, how can you possibly give up hope on coral reefs? If you give up hope on coral reefs, you're giving up hope on people, on islands, on nature, on cultural practices, on livelihoods, on everything. So, I mean, without hope, yeah, no, you can't. We just can't. That's what I would say. But at the same time, then, you have an obligation then to provide some reasons. I mean, I have an obligation to provide some reasons for that tough answer, like, no, you cannot give up hope, right? And so it's like some of the work with Pristine Seas showing this film. Hopefully all of you out there have some more hope now, right? So you've got to back up those statements, but no, without hope we have nothing left. And it's not a coral reef, it's a reef, but it's about so much more. It's people who depend on it.
Thanks
That's what
for
I
that.
would say.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We need those messages. Would anyone else like to respond to that?
Yeah, with that, question, and sometimes there's people that's everything is gonna die. We really don't need to. I always feel like I remember that story of like several blind people trying to describe an elephant, and it's where you are, then you would describe it differently, and so for me, I feel like we still see these nice reefs. We see reefs that died from the 98 bleaching or from the typhoon or from crown of thorns and come back. So I think we tend to have more, more hope in the idea that things can come back. And if every day you go and see reefs that are dying and with algae and no fish, then I guess you have to have. It's understandable if you have a different view, but I think really coming to meetings like this and hearing the different talks and looking at different places outside of where you work or outside what you normally see, it's a good way to kind of share this view that there are hopes and there are places that seems to show that things can come back, and we should not really give up on them because I think also that there's a little bit like we need to have some kind of humility that we don't know everything, and we've done a lot of work, we know all the projections, but you go to a place and then you see nature and said, why are you doing this? You're not supposed to be doing this. All this science said you're not supposed to be doing this. And there's this place in Palau, in this bay, Hermit Bay, or maybe people have read in the literature referred to as Nico Bay. And it has the pH and temperature that is predicted for the end of the century. And yet it has some of the most diverse corals, right, living under this rock island. And so you go like, you're not supposed to be like this. Why? So I think there is that thing that while we know a lot and we're learning a lot, we don't really know nature. There's still some things that will surprise us, and we have to be open to that and to hear what it's telling us.
So we saw in Super Reefs, the management strategy that was being promoted was protection and marine protected areas. What are some of the other management strategies that we should be thinking of and applying urgently right now? And what is the role of scientists in terms of communicating this information to decision makers and managers? Who would like to take that one?
I can start by giving an example of what we've been doing in our region. I think it is important, and it's one of a second word that I've been hearing in the symposium besides resilience is actually collaboration. I've been hearing a lot, and in the region, that's what we've been doing in the last few years. We've built a regional coral reef monitoring network where we're sharing the data. And I know that it is a word that scares researchers and scientists, is being able to share our data, but we cannot manage what we cannot measure. And for us to be able to protect our reefs and have in mind of all of the threats that they don't have boundaries, and reefs, they don't have boundaries as well. If we want to answer the big questions, we need to have all of the data together. And we in the region were able to bring data from 7 countries and overcome all of those political and national boundaries, and now we have over almost 4 decades of data together, and we went from only 60 sites to 380 sites that we can study in the region. And I think it is important for other regions in the world to have that in mind, that if we can bring our data together, we can then answer these questions and give the answers to the governments. They can also then use that for the biodiversity targets that they have to achieve as well. So I think it is important that we understand that all of the research that we're doing here and sharing, it needs to go outside as well. So translate into a common language that can go into the audience, to the public, and then also to the government, and use that for the bigger picture of biodiversity targets, MPAs. I think that's one of the things that we can do here and in the future, using the collaboration word more often.
And Joelle, would you like to share some of the actions that you've been taking with your communities, and now in particular, what are they doing on a daily basis to help manage the reefs?
Thank you very much. For me, it is really important that we do not take that position that there is no hope, because I think the more important question would be, or challenge, is what can we do? And so, coming from a rural background, uh, the activities are mostly farming and fishing for survival, and whatever surplus is then taken to the market. But they too are beginning to take some really like exciting moves. They are now beginning to replant some nitrogen, fast growing nitrogen fixing trees. So instead of shifting cultivation that they used to do in the past, are now beginning to be more permanent in the. So that's what I said to them. If we cannot all deal with what is happening in the reef, at least do something wherever you are working, like on land, if you are a farmer. And for the ladies, as we all know, in the Pacific, we all go walking into the coral reefs to go fish. So those are the kinds of things that I'm trying to say. Do what little you can to help the system work, because our very survival depends on that system working the way we understand it.
And I realize we are coming to time. I know it's been a long day for everyone, so I'd just like each of our panelists to leave us with one final thought of how they're thinking about coral reef futures. And Kyle, I'll start with you.
Yeah, look, I think in terms of the futures, I don't think it's on. Here we go. Testing 1, 2. Yes, good. We're back online. Look, I think in terms of the futures for coral reefs, I think it really is that intersection between, yes, science and, yes, government, but really local communities. I've been very lucky to work in Kenya and in Fiji, where I've seen the effectiveness of Tengefu and Tambu areas. And really that stewardship and local knowledge is absolutely key. I think as scientists, sometimes, as you mentioned, there's a tendency to want to be the savior and come in and solve everybody's problems. But people know how to steward their reefs and their habitats and their ecosystems. So I think as scientists, our job is to keep asking the right questions and answering the right questions. And I think for the scientists in the audience that do want to help, I think some of the best ways we can help each other and help everybody else is to collaborate widely and deeply. And by that, I mean to share ideas, share expertise, and share data. I think we're really at the point now where sort of having this walled garden of data and sort of safeguarding that we're really past that point. And so the work that we've been doing with WCS to map the world's coral reefs wouldn't be possible unless people were making that data available. And so if we do that and we create the tools and we work with local communities, hopefully we can continue to drag the governments with us, kicking and screaming to keep funding this work, and also making sure that we save the reefs and make sure that they persist into the next century and beyond.
Thank you. And Yim, what are your thoughts about reef futures in Palau and beyond across Micronesia and Polynesia?
Yeah, I think I'm one of those that is very hopeful, and I know because things that I see, the reefs that I see, I see, of course, I see damaged reefs, but I also see a lot of beautiful reefs. But it's also the communities that we work with and the communities that we've been able to partner with. If somebody say that, I went to this place and I did this great research and then this protection went into place, that's not the full story. Because I don't think, I've never seen that. There's always somebody in that community, whether it's a manager, whether it's a politician, that partnered with you and use that information and help them put those protection in place or those management measures in place. So I feel like every place there is that person. And for scientists and for researchers is to build that partnership. And with that, with the science, with dedicated leaders and dedicated community, I feel that we can do many great things together. And so, yes, I'm hopeful, and I'm also hopeful that conferences like this would lead to better solutions and better sharing of information that can give our reefs a better chance of surviving to the future. Thank you.
Thanks. And Jen, we know you're hopeful.
I think I've already made the case that I'm hopeful. But also, I'm hopeful. I do absolutely have no doubts that we will have reefs in the future. But I'm also a pragmatist, and I think that we have to be, like the reefs themselves are in heavy adaptation phase right now, right? Trying to survive these heat waves. We as people are also going to have to adapt. I do not believe that we necessarily are going to have reefs in the future that look like our reefs today. And we better be ready for that, I think, in terms of whatever we need from our reefs, be it food, be it aesthetic values, whatever it is. I do think that's where a lot of the of science can inform. I think we're getting pretty good at maybe predicting what the reefs of the future might look like. But from my personal opinion is, if we grasp too tightly to this idea that you have to have a reef 50 years from now that looks like exactly like your reef that you have right now, then I think that's going to be a problem. So, as humans, I think we're going to have to adapt like our reefs, but of course we're going to have reefs in the future, and we're going to have humans, I hope.
Thanks. Some final thoughts from you, Rita?
Yeah, I do agree with you on that. Yeah, I think that reefs, they are resilient and they do still believe in themselves. So we also have to go in the same way and adapting to the new communities that we will have. And it's very hard for us to understand how it will change. But when I look at what we have in the Arabian Persian Gulf and reefs that during the summer they have 36 degrees, and every summer we are afraid that we're going to lose the few coral cover that we have, 8%, 10%, and then we go back and we have photos that they are still there. Surprising, a different community changing, a different ecosystem, but they are still there, and that gives us hope. We know it's going to be a different, a dive in the future is different from what we have now, but we are the ones learning from them, and we have still to just go in the same direction and learn and do our best. But we need action. We need to be by their side for sure.
And Joelle, I'll leave the last word for you. What are your thoughts for passing on the legacy to future generations?
Well, I think we still have to do the best we can to learn from how to deal with the challenges that we now face. And on that note, I would like to again take us back to pristine seas. While doing all these interesting things out in the ocean, they're doing something in the Pacific right now that is to be celebrated by Pacific Islanders. They're working on, even as the expeditions were going on, they now are working with the SPC, the Pacific Community, to introduce marine science to schools. It's quite embarrassing to say that in this day and age, with the importance of the ocean and the fact that we are supposed to be large ocean island states, we don't have marine science covered in the curriculum in our schools. And Pristine Seas is now started that journey. And I think I often of the view that often people don't really know the full story our people. That's why we have to engage with our communities to talk about the relationship between the trees and the ocean and its health. So it's important for our students to begin to get better aware of the challenges that are there, facing them in the years to come by going to school and having marine science as part of the curriculum.
Vinaka Vakalevu. For those who've made it to the bitter end, won't you please join me in thanking all of our panelists this evening with a warm set of applause. And I apologize we didn't get to audience questions, but please find any of them for the rest of the conference, and I'm sure they'll be happy to answer your questions. And have a wonderful evening. Good night.